Hello everyone, I'm Majid Salehi, and in this presentation I want to talk about our paper entitled microSBS Static Binary Sanitization of Bare Metal Embedded Devices for Fault Observability. Actually, embedded devices can be separated into three classes. The first class is embedded devices with general purpose operating system, and the second class is embedded devices with some specific and customized operating system. And the third class is embedded devices without any operating system abstraction layer, and we call these devices bare metal devices. Bare metal devices are becoming more important, and they are usually used in safety critical embedded and cyber physical systems. And because of some limitation in the resources of these devices, the security is often overlooked as a trade-off. And also the firmware of these devices are usually developed and written in C or C++ programming languages that are prone to memory corruption vulnerabilities such as buffer overflow or heap overflow. And as described before, because of some resources limitation in these devices, there is no memory management unit or memory protection unit. And the memory space is shared by all processes. As a result, a single vulnerability can compromise the entire system. As we can see in this picture, which is the memory layout of ARM Cortex-M embedded devices, the whole memory space is an attack surface for the attackers. Fuzz testing or fuzzing is a popular and effective method for discovering memory corruption vulnerabilities. And in the fuzzing method, we input the application or firmware with some random inputs and look for some observable behaviors such as crashes or hangs. But because of the lack of some basic features such as MMU or MPU in these devices, we encounter some memory corruptions that are silent and trigger no observable behaviors, which is extremely difficult actually to debug such kind of memory corruptions. As a solution, the state of the art is a paper published in NDSS 2018 entitled "What You Corrupt is Not What You Crash: Challenges in Fuzzing Embedded Devices." The authors propose 6 symbol heuristic to monitor the execution of the firmware, including segment tracking, format specifier tracking, heap object tracking, and so on. But the problem is that the results show this method has some false positive and false negatives. And also the information required for these heuristics rely on some reverse engineering techniques. Also, sanitization or memory sanitization is a method that instrument application feeds some memory check instructions. And these instrumented instructions can be combined with fuzzing method to make these faulty states observable. But the problem is that at the moment, there is no binary sanitizer that provides support for bare metal firmware. Because of some unsupported instruction set architectures or operations tied to OS specific features. There are 2 ways for binary sanitization. The first one is dynamic instrumentation, which actually translates the firmware at the runtime, and it has no false positive and false negative. But the negative point about this method is that it incurs high overhead to the application, and which is really impractical for fuzzing such kind of devices. The second one is static instrumentation that has low overhead, but because of some complex static analysis, it has some false positive or false negatives. By considering these challenges and problems, we propose microSBS, which is the first binary sanitizers for bare metal embedded devices. Actually, microSBS gets the ELF file of this firmware and disassemble that to the disassembly file, and based on some sanitization specification, it instruments that file, and after that it reassemble it again to a working binary file. But there are some challenges for static binary instrumentation. Actually, if we insert or remove instructions from the binary file of the firmware, we break the reference addresses in the file. So for solving that, we need to adjust these addresses in the binary. But the first challenge is recognizing these static addresses. Actually, it is difficult to reliably distinguish pointer-like integers from the pointers. The second challenge after recognizing static addresses is relocating static addresses. And the third challenge is determining dynamically referenced memory addresses. For handling these problems, we need to first classify the references in one application. As you can see here, we have an application which has two printer functions, and in the main function we call one of these printers for print a string. And you can see in the assembly code of this example that we have a pointer to the data section. Actually, in the data section, we have a pointer to another part of that data section for which contains the address of the printer function, which actually points to the printer function. And in the printer function, we point to the printf function. So you can see here that we have 4 types of the references in one application: code section to code section to data section to data section, and data section to code section references. So if we can handle all these references, we can manage to solve the problem and challenges described before. For handling them, we rewrite all the old instruction in the old code section to a new code section aligned with new inserted instructions. Actually, we preserve the starting address of the data section intact, and we do not instrument the data space. By doing so, we actually handle code to data and data to data references. But for handling code to code sections and data to code section references, we easily adjust the static addresses before the runtime. But for the dynamically computed addresses, we do not attempt to identify the original address before the runtime. And also, we ignore how addresses are computed and only focus on final target. So we rewrite all indirect branches to a mapping routine, and in the mapping routine, we translate addresses dynamically at runtime. For example, here you can see that we have the original code section and an indirect branch instruction. And after rewriting that, we replace this branch instruction with a jump to the mapping routine, and in the mapping routine we try to find the corresponding address to the old address in the new code section, and after that we jump to this new translated address. After managing these binary instrumentation challenges, we are able to sanitize the firmware based on some sanitization specification. Inspired by address sanitizer and Valgrinis memcheck, we surround memory values with a red zone. And also we instrument every memory instructions to check that is that memory instruction is going to write in a red zone or in a green zone. And if it is going to violate the memory policy, we trigger a crash to the fuzzer. Our implementation is focused on ARM version 7M architecture, which is a widely used architecture for embedded devices. And also we developed our firmware in 1600 line of code in Python language. And we use Capstone framework as our underlying linear disassembler, and PyElf tools for parsing the ELF files, and Pound tools for reassembling instrumented assembly code. Also, for evaluating the effectiveness of our method and see whether it can make faulty states observable on binary firmware in an automatic fashion, we consider 4 firmware: Broadcom firmware, Controlino firmware, Gateway, and firmware from the state-of-the-art method for making faulty states observable. And we also, as you can see, cover different types of memory corruption vulnerabilities. microSBS was able to detect and discover all of these vulnerabilities. For evaluating the performance impact of microSBS, we consider 11 firmware that are developed by STM Microelectronics, and for each one of them we instrument them without sanitization with microSBS and also with sanitization with microSBS. For the firmware that are instrumented without sanitization, the average slowdown was about 88%. Also for the firmware with sanitization method, the execution overhead is about 32%. And also for the evaluating the processing time of microSBS, you can see in this chart that the microSBS spends about 5 seconds for sanitizing and instrumenting each firmware, which is actually a promising result compared to the state of the art for making faulty states observable. But we have some limitations and problems in this paper. Actually, we just consider the statically linked firmware that are developed for the bare metal embedded devices, but we do not consider the dynamic code loading for these devices. So as an extension, we can also support the firmware with dynamic code loading in the future. Also, the architecture that we support in this tool is ARM architecture, which is a widely used architecture for embedded devices, but we can also extend the microSBS for supporting other architecture. Also, IoT fuzzing is not that much effective compared to the fuzzing method in the general purpose area. So we can have more contribution in the IoT fuzzing in our future work. Also, sanitization methods that are used in our microSBS tool are based on the address sanitizer and Valgrind sanitizer, but we can consider other types of the sanitization methods to cover more types of the memory corruption vulnerabilities. As a conclusion, fuzzing bare metal microcontrollers requires a paradigm shift, and sanitization can improve fault detection in these devices. MicroSBS is the first static binary sanitizer for bare metal firmware, and to foster further research, we make MicroSBS open source. Thank you for attention.